Hopefully that's a little bit better.
Yeah.
Welcome to the inauguration of the LES HRC Speaker Series. I'm Alexandra Dyer. I'm LES HRC's Executive Director. We will be presenting a series of lectures on harm reduction given by such experts in the field as Dr. Stanton Peele, who is with us this evening. All lectures will be free and open to the public. We hope to create a greater awareness in the general public of the benefits of harm reduction, as well as to highlight the knowledge that harm reduction includes a broad array of services, psychotherapeutic services, housing services, and many others, in addition to clean needle programs. Moreover, we wish to instill an awareness that harm reduction is a philosophy which encourages every positive change, from safer use to reduced use to quitting altogether. Finally, harm reduction is a philosophy which is not limited to dealing with drug use, but can and does apply to all facets of life. We are planning for this series to take place quarterly, and we anticipate the next installment this winter. Also, we would like you to know that we always welcome volunteers or donations. Please go to our website for that information. It's leshrc.org. And we'll be emailing you with a list of opportunities after this evening's event as well. And on the back table, we have some brochures from LES. Please feel free to take as many as you like. I want to thank our host, the New School for Social Research, for their gracious donation of this lovely space, and our co-sponsors, the Drug Policy Alliance, Open Society Foundations, Harm Reduction Coalition, the Center for Optimal Living, HAM's Harm Reduction for Alcohol, St. Jude's Retreat, and Smart Recovery NYC. And I don't want to forget, last but not least, Ken Anderson, who is LES HRC's Director of Development. He brought this speaker series from a concept to its reality. And so this evening, Dr. Stanton Peele's topic is what will replace the 12 steps. By way of introduction, Stanton Peele has been at the cutting edge of addiction theory and treatment since his publication, written with Archie Brodsky, of Love and Addiction in 1975. He has authored 12 books and 250 articles, as well as developing the Life Process Program for addiction treatment. Among the ideas Stanton has pioneered are that the addictive properties of drugs are invariably exaggerated, that non-drug involvements like love, sex, and gambling may be addictive, that people often recover from addiction and alcoholism in the natural course of their lives without being treated, that people's self-empowerment, values, and purpose in life can be the light out of the tunnel, and that people generally make gradual improvements in their lives that lead them out of addiction. His next book, being written with Ilsa Thompson, Recover, Stop Thinking Like an Addict, will be published in February 2014. And without any further, Dr. Peele.
Thank you. So nice to be here. I have a pretty big, broad view of addiction. I'm going to talk about what addiction is and what causes it and its natural course, and what the best treatments for addiction are, and what policy implications it has, my view of addiction has. Right at this moment in life, we're redefining addiction. When I wrote Love and Addiction in 1975, in the early 70s, I was talking to a psychiatrist, and she said to me, well, we all know what addiction is. It's very well defined. People had a very clear idea of what addiction meant and what caused it. And I would say virtually in a straight line, our understanding of addiction and how clear we feel its meaning is has declined. We're far less certain about what addiction means now than we were when I was writing Love and Addiction. And I think that's because we haven't grasped some basic changes that we need to make in the way we think about addiction. One constantly evolving thing is that we now think more things are addictive. And of course, I wrote Love and Addiction in 1975 at a time when addiction meant one thing only. What did addiction mean in 1975? What's that?
I would think alcohol.
Heroin. When you said addiction, everybody thought heroin and vice versa. The 12 steps are declining in importance. Now, they're still, as we'll review, the major game in town, but they're not the only game in town. And I should mention, we have many distinguished people present. One person here is Tom Horvath, who's the head of Smart Recovery, a support group which within 10 years he feels, is that accurate, will be as ever omnipresent as AA. I'm glad to have Tom here because there is one thing I want to mention about my connection to Tom. I've known him a long time. Lest you think that I'm some kind of a philosopher of addiction, a writer, some abstract theorist, I had a private treatment center, and Tom was on the board of my treatment center. And we spent some time together training counselors and speaking with residents. And the people who got to that place were generally pretty screwed up. By the time you end up in a residential rehab, you're usually what most people would call addicted. Will harm reduction be what replaces the 12 steps? I think they're counteracting trends in that direction. Naturally, I want to encourage one of them, as the Lower East Side Harm Reduction Center does. But I think that's a battle that's going on. And one of the things that we're fighting, I think, is the medical model of addiction, which is rising to replace the 12 steps, but which I think maintains many of its essential elements. What's addiction?
What is addiction? Well, I cannot quote to you, but I agree with ASAM's definition of addiction at this
What is
point in
that?
time. It has to do with, at the end of the day, being so caught up with a substance, as it were, that despite the negative outcomes, you still pursue it.
Not bad. Not bad. Is that a medical definition?
It's a definition that is
Sounds kind of
developed by
experiential.
medical practitioners.
Well, if the definition's right, we wouldn't expect medical practitioners to reject it. We'd expect everybody to use it, would you think?
No, because I'm not a scientist, and I take it that medical practitioners, as scientists, look at things in different ways than laymen.
Well, your definition is very experiential, almost existential, would you say? Don't they diagnose, doesn't ASAM diagnose addiction by brain scans?
I think with the work that Dr. Nora Balkar is now doing, there is that component in that definition, which is also...
Do you think that'll be ultimately how we diagnose addiction?
I beg your pardon?
Do you think ultimately that'll be how we diagnose addiction?
I think that the scientific community will continue to do their DSMs and other medical...
Hold on, that's not exactly the answer. How many people in the United States are diagnosed for addiction right now, which you say by a brain scan?
Zero.
Zero. Zero. Zero. How do you decide somebody's addicted? Well, you said how you decide how somebody's addicted. They come in, their life's really screwed up, they can't get oriented, and they continue to do whatever it is they're doing. Oh, whoops. Can people recover from addiction? The lady in the right here.
Yes.
Good answer. We'll talk more about how people recover from addiction. There's something called DSM-5, which our friend referred to. That's the diagnostic manual. It's very important because every human being, every practitioner, medical or otherwise, is required, is obligated to use DSM-5 to define addiction. It just came out in May of 2013. How does DSM-5 define addiction? Okay.
I mean, I know that it uses addiction for the first time, but primarily, as you have up there, depending upon how many criteria it endures for a specific, alcohol use disorder, opiate use disorder, that's how it's all broken down.
Do you remember that psychiatrist who told me that addiction was well defined way back in the early 70s? Remember her? Addiction is not used in regards to drugs in DSM-5. The word addiction does not appear in connection with drugs. It does not appear. Is that a kick in the head? The DSMs hang around for 20 years. The word drug addiction and alcohol addiction is not, so there is no, DSM-5 is how everybody diagnoses, not only in the United States, but worldwide eventually. Addiction has disappeared with regard to drugs. Is that amazing? What they say instead, oh, I didn't bold that. SUDs mean substance use disorders, mild, moderate, and severe. But I'm not entirely accurate when I said the word addiction doesn't appear in DSM-5. It appears in regards to one thing. One thing. One thing in DSM-5 is addictive.
Isn't it the appendix regarding the internet usage? Is
No.
it? I'm not sure.
And internet isn't currently even being considered really.
Is it gambling?
Give it time.
There's one thing called a behavioral addiction. By the way, did I mention that I read Love and Addiction in 1975? When I said eating and gambling and sex and love could be addictive? After 38 years, after mulling it over all that time, American psychiatry has decided one thing. Does ASAN believe that gambling's addictive?
I'm not sure.
A lot of uncertainty out there. After all that rumination, they concluded that one thing in the universe is addictive, gambling. It took a lot of thought, and that's what but they have one thing for under. There's one more under consideration. You know what that is? Gosh, and it's already out. One thing's under consideration, gaming, like electronic games. Of all the things in the universe, 38 years of thinking, gambling's addictive and perhaps gaming is. Why is gambling addictive? Buddy, why is gambling addictive?
Me?
Yeah, you.
It's compulsive. It's something that when people begin to act on the gambling, there is a mechanism in the body that puts them into.
What's the mechanism?
The release of adrenaline, dopamine.
So is gambling the only non-drug activity?
Absolutely.
Does gambling meet the definition you gave at the beginning of addiction?
Sure, many things do.
Many things do. Huh. How many people in this room believe gambling is addictive? Raise your hand.
Have we defined addictive yet?
He defined addiction, and I thought he gave a good definition. Why is sex not addictive? By the way, it's a little complicated. I hate, this is going to be a complicated lecture. I hope you're here to think. You don't mind thinking, do you?
No, I don't mind.
You're in the right place then.
Yeah.
Sex is not addictive, but they have something called hypersexuality, okay? Now, why is there not sexual addiction but something called hypersexuality? Let's leave that aside for one moment. and this gets back to you, that physical thing in the body of gambling. In a highly publicized study, researchers found that people diagnosed with hypersexuality, which means that you're so preoccupied with sex that you get in trouble, didn't have special brain responses to sexual stimuli. Hypersexuality did not appear to explain differing differences in sexual response any more than simply having a high libido. What's that mean? What's that mean, buddy? What's that say?
Let's see. It doesn't, hypersexuality did not appear to explain what happens.
You're not to use your own words, buddy.
What happens chemically in the body. And that compulsive, similar to the gambling. The rise in...
They have people who are hypersexual who misbehave with regard to sex, but when they look at how their brain responds to sexual stimuli, it's no different than highly sexed people who aren't sexual addicts. Yes?
Was this done by imaging?
What's that?
Was this done through using brain imaging?
Yes.
So
They did brain imaging.
it's totally out of context. I mean, it's not a behavioral situation. And it's a-
Well, look, you can screw that whole thing. All of Neurovolco's work is based on people looking at images and measuring brain response. If you want to say that's all bullshit, you're right, but that's not the reason. Hypersex, what's that last sentence mean? Just translate it to English.
Say people aren't sex addicts, they're just really horny.
That's not what they're saying.
You can't reduce it to a sort of chemical issue, it's something else going on. It's not.
Well
you
done,
don't
buddy.
get the answer.
Well done. You can't reduce it to brain responses.
It's a whole cultural, it's a whole life.
Now, this is written by Maya Salovitz, a good friend of mine. So she's saying, well, that doesn't mean that sexual compulsions qualify as an addiction. The latest study, that's the one we just talked about, argued that sex isn't addictive because hypersexual people process sexual cues just like normal people do. And differently from the way addicts respond to drug cues. But whatever you want to call it, compulsions can be just as disruptive as addictions and equally difficult to overcome. Gosh, that's a long way around the argument. I don't know how much time I'm going to spend on it. So they're not addicted because they couldn't measure a special response in the brain, yet the people are getting really screwed up around sex and they can't quit. Now, if we went by your definition, that would mean that we're in a problem because the brain response measurement and the behavioral measurement differ. Which would you go by?
Well, not by my definition. The definition that I gave didn't include the brain imaging. What it talked about was the behavioral outcomes that despite...
So if you're a clinician, somebody comes in and they say, you know, I'm masturbating around the clock, or, you know, my husband or my wife is divorcing me and I'm getting in trouble. And you would say, well, sorry, you're not a sex addict. Because we couldn't measure. Now, how do you think those normal, highly sexed people differ from sex addicts? That's a whole advanced class. They can't distinguish between, can you give me one word? Because we got to move on here. One word that distinguishes between highly sexed people who aren't sex addicts and...
They're more adaptive. It's not causing them harm. They're adapting to...
How do you adapt when you're a highly sexed person?
I don't know.
Control.
How about
What did you say
judgment?
that?
Control.
Well done, buddy. Some people seem to control their impulses more. Gosh, that's an old-fashioned idea, isn't it? Do drug addicts' brains differ? You know, Neurovolco's made a big business out of this, but we don't have MRIs of addicts versus controlled brains, users' brains with cocaine. They don't do that. What would that research require? You'd have to get into Neurovolco's laboratory and say, oh yeah, I use cocaine, but I don't meet the definition of addiction. People tend not to volunteer for that assignment. You know what I mean? And generally speaking, people don't pony up and say, I'm breaking the law. People end up in her laboratory because they're fucked up. And then they look at what cocaine does to them. And what about those who cease or reduce their addiction, their cocaine addiction, or any other addiction? Do you think there are more 25-year-old sex addicts than 45-year-old sex addicts? What the hell happens? Did I make this point already? No human being is diagnosed as addicted based on an MRI. Nobody in the world. Do food addicts ever recover? And sex addicts? How does abstinence work with them? Let's not get sidetracked. This is my definition of addiction and the meaning of it, well, whatever. Addiction occurs when a person seeks out an experience, ritual, or reward to the exclusion and detriment of all other goals and activities. The measure of addictiveness is how absorbing, compelling, and harmful the person's involvement is. Nothing else matters. That's it. That's the whole damn definition. We're addicted. What we're addicted to is the experience the drug creates for us. Addiction can occur with any type of involvement. So then DSM-5, by my point of view, how are they barking up the wrong tree? What are they doing that my approach says makes no sense?
They're basing it on a substance.
What's that?
They're basing it on a substance, not an experience.
They're trying to create a list of things that are addictive. And that someday will go the way of the caveman. And I know what everybody in this room is thinking. Finally, then, I'll get my Nobel Prize. I know everybody. First thing. Addiction is a continuum. So in a way, I'm agreeing with that substance use disorder, mild, moderate, and severe. In a way, I mean, well, it depends what you call addiction, but that thing, it varies along a continuum. An addiction should track from all other involvements a person has. Addiction is not a pleasurable experience. Addiction is the inability to choose not to do something when it begins to hurt or when it ceases to be pleasurable, which is pretty close to what you said, wouldn't you say? You and I are working the same path, buddy. All right, let's talk about drugs. We talked about addiction. We got a picture of addiction. Let's talk about drugs. In 1981, Janet Cook won a Pulitzer Prize at the Washington Post for a story about an 8-year-old heroin addict. She had one little problem that bedeviled her, and they took the Pulitzer Prize back. What was the problem that Janet Cook had that they took her Pulitzer Prize back? Maybe they were glasses. Nobody in this room knows who Janet Cook is.
There's one person.
She made it up. Now, what was her logic when she made up the story about an 8-year-old heroin addict and she followed her? What was her logic? Why did she know that would be a big seller? You can't say enough bad things about drugs. You never lose saying a bad, okay, she lost. You can't say enough bad things about heroin, crack, and meth heads. Are drugs the worst? Are drugs the most addictive things in the world? What's the most addictive thing in the world?
I was just thinking that it could be, that people can be just as obsessed and compulsive with any number of things: sex, gambling, shopping,
Love.
I wrote a blog for Psychology, very popular. The 7 worst addictions, and the worst of all is love. Very few people commit suicide when they're quitting heroin. It doesn't happen, really. Oh, they might feel worse or better. People don't commit suicide when they're quitting heroin. People commit suicide all the time when they break up in a love relationship. That's a kick in the head. I had something in my life that I'd rather be dead than live without. By the definition of addiction. And even if the guy's beating her, or it's a sick-low relationship. A little bit of data here. There's a large addiction problem in Vietnam. Tremendous use of heroin. Of the people, the soldiers measured in Vietnam to be addicted, 5/6 of addicts recovered when they returned home, 83%. But half of them tried a narcotic in the United States. Contrary to conventional belief, the occasional use of narcotics without becoming addicted appears possible, even for the men who have previously been dependent on narcotics. Anybody in this room and anybody's mother in this room could answer the question, why did they recover?
They weren't in Vietnam anymore.
And what was the matter? What made you less likely to be addicted if you weren't in Vietnam? Compared to,
Well, you're in a much more pleasant environment. You don't have to escape. You don't have to escape in Vietnam.
and you also have more control over your environment and more positive options. It's not brain science, except Nora Volkow doesn't know this, which is brain science. If the less you know about modern addiction theory, the more easily you can answer this question correctly. Why did they recover? And your grandmother can answer this question, but not anymore. If you join ASAM, you won't know the answer to this question. Carl Hart was interviewed in the Times a couple of days ago. 80-90% of people who use crack and methamphetamine don't get addicted. And the small number who do become addicted are nothing like popular caricatures. You believe that? That 80-90% of people who use methamphetamine don't become addicted? Do you believe that?
I'm not sure.
Well, Hart may be full of shit as far as you're concerned. Your jury's out on you.
No, that's not what I said.
Oh. That's what he said. He said 80-90% of meth and crack users are not addicted. You're saying you're not sure that that's true. But be nice.
Right.
You agree with him or you don't? Be honest here.
I would want to see more research, but I would tend to believe it because of the hype around drug use and all the lies with the junk science.
Well, here's my conflict with Carl Hart. It's well known that 80-90% of meth and crack users aren't addicted. That's well known in history. That he had to do all that research to find that out. And his research doesn't actually tell us that. Epidemiological research tells us that. The key factor is the environment, whether you're talking about humans or rats. The rats that keep pressing the lever are the ones who are stressed out. But when you enrich their environment, give them access to sweets and let them play with other rats, they stop, which is a little bit the answer to the Vietnam question, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So if you're paying attention in Vietnam, you would know the answer to this question. 80-90% of people are not negatively affected by drugs, but in the scientific literature, nearly 100% of the reports are negative. There's a skewed focus on pathology. Remember I was talking to you about, I already forget her name, that Hart lady? You can't say anything too negative about drugs. And that's important. Carl Hart's going to learn something that I know about. What an interesting man, what an interesting experience. People aren't going to mind this. Not in America, not Nora Volkow, not ASAM. Do you think ASAM is going to go along with that? ASAM declares 90% of people are not effectively negatively. Do you think that'll become like one of ASAM's models? No.
They're already balking against it. There's already blowback on the statement, which they're taking the first part of it and not adding the richer dimension.
What's the first part?
That 80 to 90% of people who use crack do not become addicted. Because there's a lot of campaigns, like the Meth Project, for instance, has a new campaign out called Not Even Once, right? So,
aren't you a drug-free America or something?
Yes, I am.
But you're sounding very sensible, buddy.
We've grown up a little bit, and we're becoming a more sensible organization. What can I say? Times change.
Does AA think drugs are bad?
Yes.
You look quizzical. Does AA think drugs?
I was just reading the slide. Yes, they do.
No,
I don't know. They don't.
No, they are pro-psychotropics. And psychotropics are drugs, and people.
Oh,
who
you
get
mean
high-
medications?
Yeah,
Well,
see, this qualification of illegal versus illegal
Well, there's a lot
drugs
of
and
AA
addiction,
people
I think the lines are beginning to get blurred.
What do you think about
Beginning
that,
to
Tom?
realize
Is AA negative towards
it's all
drugs?
across the board.
There's official AA, and then there's a lot of the people in AA. And my experience is that they're generally opposed to drugs and alcohol.
Officially, though.
Now, one thing that's really important about, this is an important issue around drug policy and drug legalization. There are big liberals in AA. Are they for or against marijuana legalization?
Against it.
William Cope Moyers is Bill Moyers' son, you know, the big Johnson advisor. Patrick Kennedy, of course, is part of the Kennedy family. They don't want legalization. Why? Why?
Well, the big book of AA says alcohol is cunning and baffling. The problem with addiction is located in the interaction between a cunning and baffling drug and the hypothetical or mythological vulnerability of the disease of addiction. So it's completely decontextualized.
So you're gonna have, you would you think liberals would be more likely to be in favor of drug legalization? You would think.
But if they embrace a philosophy that proposes that they have no real control over this, then it makes sense that one would want to eliminate it.
AA, in its basic orientation, would seem to be fundamentally opposed to legalization, where the concept is it's going to be up to you to regulate your own drug use. That's a tough road to hoe if you're planning on legalizing drugs in America or developing a non-criminal approach to drugs. A big, tough road to hoe. A hard marketing element.
I think that AA, there's one of their documents that they read at meetings, says that AA, about other people, we have no opinion about whether alcohol is good or bad for other people. But for us,
that's the story, but
that's the story, but
that's the official.
As Alan said, if you believe that people have this susceptibility. This appeared in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago. New York Times had a baby boomers ask the expert. M.W. Olson asked, can addiction be cured as a lifelong problem? This is 2 weeks ago. I said this to you, Tom. Addiction, this is a big expert from the Mayo Clinic. Addiction is a chronic disease. There is no cure. It needs to be managed daily. Many addicts, after long-term sobriety, even through continuing their 12-step work, may experience relapse. It's very important to note that no matter how long you've been sober, you should not think you're cured, because we do see people relapse. How would you characterize that statement as a testimony about human beings and human spirit? What would you say, the guy behind you? How would you, just do a little, did you take any English courses in college?
Sure.
How would you, just look at that from a literary standpoint, how would you, what's that word they use in English? Deconstruct that message.
The whole answer?
Yes.
It's something to be scared of.
It's really scary. You're kind of doomed.
Yeah. Spanish Inquisition.
Your power was.
it's a cynical statement. Yeah.
It's a really negative statement about human beings. If you had a child who was addicted, let's go, they're looking at gaming as a possible addiction. So let's say your 17-year-old was diagnosed with gaming as an addiction. Then there sure seem to be some kids that look like they're addicted to electronic games. There's, and it's not funny. There are people who are really depressed and not functioning. Would this be a good message to give that kid? You have a chronic disease.
It's undermining. It's just
there is
something
no,
undermining.
what's the word? It's undermining. What therapist in the universe, if you had a therapy service Wouldn't you fire somebody? Buddy, you're doomed. There's no cure for what you've got. You'll never get over it, yes?
I think the way to really front-load it now, addiction is a chronic relapsing brain disease. It's like cancer of the brain. That's what Norvolco says.
Norvolco.
Cancer of the brain.
Have you ever heard of these?
Yeah.
Let's do a literary contextual analysis. We're wide-ranging intellectuals here. We're not just looking at brain scans. We admitted we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. Huh.
Can I interject something?
You're talking too much now, buddy. I like you. What about you? What's your opinion of that? Ever heard of these before?
Certainly. It's I mean it's based on faith, essentially.
That's right.
They do have that thing where God could just be a doorknob, but I never got that. Make a decision to turn our will and lives over to a doorknob. I just never got that. But let's get deeper into the 12 steps. Step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Are any of you therapists? Do you spend a lot of time? We really need to go over the exact nature of your wrongs. That's what we're going to be spending a lot of our time in therapy. And step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. You know, modern therapy, God bless the ASAM, tends not to talk about defects of character. Do you know what I'm saying? What a negative view of human beings. How ground into people. And they're indoctrinating them with these 12 steps. It's still the biggest thing. That lady in the New York Times is telling baby boomers, think this way. This is a powerful imprint on our society. It's beyond calculation how powerful it is. But if we had some some Lone Ranger music now, there is some rescue available. It's coming soon. I have a new book coming in. It's called Recover. Stop thinking like an addict and reclaim your life with the perfect program. I'll talk at the last slide what that's about. Stop thinking like an addict. You see, I believe the 12 steps teaches people to think like addicts. So you see, I'm in a bad way, you know what I mean? Because everybody believes in the 12 steps.
Blasphemy.
David Brooks, conservatives believe in the 12 steps. But the world's changing. AA and the 12 steps isn't the only game in town. Us should be our, and whatever. You know, the other thing about the 12 steps, do you think addiction's declining in America? Man with a nice tie, I like that.